And here we are. Welcome, everybody. We have the most extraordinary gentleman sitting before us this evening. Just before I go into an official definition of who Richard is, that I just want to remind you that Deep Dialogues is a perfect platform for glorious people like Richard, meaning leading global soul stewards who are really determining a new hierarchy of values to help us all understand ways of being able to create a brave new world. And this particular gentleman has a very remarkable project that he's going to be talking about. Many of you possibly know him because he is the founder and the creator of the Gene Keys. And so apart from that, you know, Richard is an international teacher, a writer, and a very fine poet who has been a keen meditator for many, many, many years. And as I've just said, he's the founder of the Gene Keys synthesis, which is really an integral matrix of human evolutionary potential, which represents a convergence of many lineages, of many wisdom traditions, and indeed cosmic dimensions. And Richard's teaching spans the chasm between the mystical and the practical of everyday life. So, you know, wherever Richard may go from an intellectual or a cosmic point of view, we know that he is also a very grounded individual. Richard, wonderful to meet you again. Thank you for coming to Deep Dialogues.
Yeah, lovely to be here.
Bless you, bless you, bless you. We were talking in our pre-show chat about this very extraordinary point of illumination that has been revealed through the Gene Keys, and that you are one of the great spokespeople for, which is the nature of a prophecy in relation to the times in which we're living. I wonder if you could possibly reveal to us what your definition of these times are, if we need one, and secondly, what the prophecy is.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, well, I sort of refer to this time as the Great Change, and it's a it's a bit of a story, isn't it, to unpack? I want to actually source where it came from. So, because it wasn't entirely me, it also came through a mentor I had 20 or so years ago, strange man by the name of RUDD, who brought through this teaching called the Human Design System. So, and so he was the kind of primary genius that kind of, what he did is he took the Chinese I Ching, which many of you will know about, 64 hexagrams, 64 symbols, and he put them in a ring, or a circle, and then he mapped them onto the zodiac, and he had a big epiphany, you know, a big experience in which this was shown to him, and out of that came a whole new way, a whole system called human design, and a whole new way of mapping cosmic energies that was slightly different from astrology. It maps alongside astrology, but it puts it alongside the hexagrams and the lines of the codes of the I Ching, which is quite a powerful tool because the I Ching kind of maps directly to our DNA through its codons, 64 codons, and the structure and the way they're built. And so it actually is a kind of as above, so below, big, amazing genetic clock. It's a way of looking at big patterns that are in the heavens reflected down here on Earth and in our human lives. And so it's a way of tracking archetypes and patterns and things like that. And anyway, what Ra discovered as he mapped, as many astrologers have done, mapping what's called the precession of the equinoxes, which shows grand cycles, you know, big cycles of change. And so he used the system to look at that. And what he discovered in doing that is that in the year 2027 is a massive change, because the precession shifts from one whole cycle to the next cycle. And the last time it shifted would have been in the 1600s, around the period of Descartes and the sort of early Enlightenment, and that shift that basically many people have kind of said that was the sort of modern age, that the building of cities, you know, how it carried on growing into what we see today. what's amazing is that that period now comes to an end, or is coming to an end, and a whole new epoch is opening up. So that's my sort of intro. We can dive into the codes and things, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm in huge humility in receiving the definition that you provide, because I know it comes from a masterly source that is touched with genius. And then, of course, I reflect on the fact that it's parallels in a number of other wisdom traditions. For example, the Mayan wisdom tradition. There are many parallels. But of course, as soon as you say 64, my mind pings into Atlantis and Egypt. And in Egypt, the 64 Netta, the 64 gods and goddesses, that were obviously reflections of the prime entities that we're talking about, which we know are effectively highly cellular. And that there are a way, or in our humanness, of being able to understand how we became physicalized in the face of the divine, in the face of the mystical currents of the cosmos. So I find it absolutely fascinating. Have you ever read Greg Braden's book, The Fractal Time?
Yeah, I have looked at it. Yes, I have, because that was a term that I thought I'd coined, and then I found out that he had, which, and so I thought, well, I wonder what he means by it. And because I was looking at the patterns of, you know, how, you know, because when we look at fractal images in space, we can see them in space, like science. Because people often say to me, why is it astrology? Why does it have to do with time of birth and all that? Because I can't get past that. You know, some people can't resonate with that. Many of us, well, it's fine. We love those patterns, but some of the very left brain people find that quite hard, and I understand. And so I was looking at, like, well, if you kind of acknowledge that the universe is fractal in nature, which we know, you know, it's just like, it's common science now. You can look at all the different sciences and you can see the same fractal patterns in, you know, you cut open a grapefruit and there's the pattern that you find in a nebula, and it's like, it's everywhere, right? We know these things now, but you have to then apply that same coding to time. If you're going to apply it to space, which it is, you can't avoid time. You know, time and space intimately linked. So what is fractal time? It's the same notion that time is holographic, and that at every instant in time, like this second, there is a set of patterns and sequences and energies that are kind of unfolding, and they're kind of, they cycle to the next one and then the next one, and the whole thing, like a big clock, is unraveling over large periods of time, over small periods of time. And you can look into this fractal map of time at any level you want to. You know, so you can look at big cycles, and like the Mayans did and the Egyptians did, or you can look at like much smaller cycles, like astrologers might look at like a lifetime, or they might look at when you were born and things like that. So every moment has power. Like the person being born now, this moment, there's a very specific set of patterns encoded in that moment. And if you have the clock or the map, then you can look at that pattern and you can see, well, what can we learn about that being that's just come in at that moment? What's the snapshot telling us? What are the cosmic forces? And you can look specifically in the gene keys. You can look in the 64 places, like where were certain planets at that moment you were born, and what genes what genetic processes do they correspond to at an archetypal level? And then you can like decipher all kinds of really amazing things. And that's what, you know, gene keys, if anyone's interested, you can go and look on the website and you can get your profile and you can look and see, well, what are my patterns? And we've done a lot of work, you know, over the years of like deciphering them, so you can kind of get your free profile and you can look and you can go, well, oh wow, these are some of my codes, and I've put them into language. I've used my gift of language to be able to kind of put them into simple, small kind of little language codes, so that they maybe have meaning for each person. And so I guess that puts in a bit of a framework for people who are new as well.
Yes. And I'd
Yeah.
love to just go deeper into the essence of the
I
gene.
haven't mentioned the prophecy, have I?
Well, we'll get there in a second. Don't
Yeah.
worry. I've got it tagged. When you go into, if you can synthesize the bounty that you've just spoken of in the gene keys, what is the essence, in just a sentence, what is the essence of the gene keys?
Well, the essence is it shows you the pathway of your life. You know, it shows you the hidden interior pathways of awakening that are encoded in each of us uniquely. And so that enables you to look at the sequence, the natural sequence by which you are designed, in a way, pre-designed to awaken to your higher consciousness. And that's in a simple.
Yeah.
You know.
Which is what I asked for. So that's lovely. So why is that necessary?
Well, I think it helps us. It's like looking. It's like you're. It's like you're traveling through, a foreign land, and you kind of you. Let's say you have very good intuition, and so you're following your intuition. You're trying to get somewhere, but then you pull out the map and you look at the map and you go, yeah, oh, that's good. Yeah, that was a correct thing, a choice I made. Or it might be, oh, I'm going to go a little bit. Actually, I went a bit wrong there. I'm going to turn left so it's about having the map as a kind of backup, not as like something you want to run your life, but as something that reflects you. Oh, yeah, I'm on the right track. So the map or these profiles show you. Essentially, the first thing they show you is your shadow patterns. So they show you where you get stuck and where you sometimes get distracted, or where you make it's not that it's a wrong turning, but it's a turning that might lead you into trouble. And so it helps you understand and transform those shadow patterns inside, and that's where it all begins. And then inside those shadows, hidden, are gifts. And that's the sort of key of the gene keys, is that every shadow contains a gift. So once you understand the shadow, you also understand what's the gift in that shadow. Then you don't have to try and get rid of the shadows. It's not like something you're trying to escape, or you actually go directly, more courageously towards them, because you realize they're transformational fields, and out of them can come huge revelations and creativity and thrust, and uplift. And that's why there's a third level in the language. This is all built into the Gene Keys language. Shadows, words for 64 shadows, words for 64 gifts, and words for 64 cities, which is that lovely Sanskrit word that means like divine. It's like a superpower. It's like these cities are your superpower. So I don't know. It's like one of the few systems I've ever come across that shows you your superpowers. It shows you this is what you look like in a fully enlightened, awakened, self-realized state. And then it also shows you this is what you look like in a complete victim horror show. So
it comes at a very, you bring it forth at a very unique time when we're able to really grapple with an understanding of what our transcendence may be, but that the only path through into the substance, the essence of transcendence, is through truth, the conduit of truth. To thine own self be true. And in order to be true, we need to examine where is our shadow. And we're seeing it reflected in our world because we're seeing so much shadow complex being evinced on the world stage through the world players and so forth, which of course is that's no condemnation, no judgment. It's merely an observation of, yes, and therefore what we're seeing is a projection of our own consciousness. And so if we want to heal that, we need to heal this. And by healing this, that changes. And of course, I know there are so many questions that I'd love to ask about the dynamics of the gene keys and how it practicalizes the substance of the emotional aspect of people's lives. Because you just said something which was really very glaring about the fact that by looking into the gene keys and seeing exactly where the varying states lie, so to speak, whether it be the shadow states or the elixir of life, and then moving into the higher impulses of the city consciousness of where we can get absolutely aware of the way that we feel, because generally speaking, the understanding of today is that feeling is the language of the soul, rather than overly caught in the intellect, because evidently we can see in the world that the intellect is empowered as a device that is actually becoming tyrannous, and now is becoming obfuscated, particularly in relation to our young ones in university campuses who don't even know what sexuality they are or what gender they are, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So we seem to have a whole group of people stepping forward to allow us to understand what those points of definitions are, and they're the real brave bastions of understanding what Western enlightenment is and what civilization means. And they're all political journalists who are atheists, but they're actually dealing with ipso facto detail because they're pretty smart intellects. Anyway, but back to where we were. So I know that you're looking at today and seeing how today is a malaise of different aspects of a diminution of Western civilization. And I wonder if you could actually perhaps, in your own perspective, through the lens of the gene keys, note which particular areas of our world do you feel are moving through gross diminishment? What do we need to observe? And then we can talk about the prophecy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, when you mention like the younger kind of groups of people coming through, and obviously, you know, when you look into the keys, you're looking at universal patterns, right? So even though you may have your own keys and codes like you'll get from the profile, we actually have all of them, because we live in the field of all of them, and they're actually imprinted in us as archetypes, and so we recognize them all. But we have specific ones that kind of we're here to learn in this life really powerfully. And that's when you look at your profile, you're looking at, these are the ones that you really want to be looking at for you. But when you're looking at the whole world, you can look at all of them. And you can also zone in on, there's a teaching that I've not really taught yet that everyone always keeps asking me to teach, because, and it's called, in Gene Keys, it's called the code on rings, and they're groupings of keys that live together. If you extrapolate them into our DNA, they're kind of collections of codons and amino acids that live together in families in our DNA. So then when you look at them as keys, as archetypes through the gene keys, you're looking at really interesting patterns. And really, as I understand them, they're the sort of underpinning of Dharma, of what kind of, if you were to be able to look under the world, underneath the fabric of human destiny, this is what you'd see. You'd see these codes and machinations and rings that are kind of, it's like they're the underpinning of the flow of the cycles of nature and life. And so what you're seeing is something that's very hidden that most people don't see. And so an example would be if you look at the gene key, which is called number 56. And if you know I Ching, you'll kind of know that you'll have all kinds of understandings about I Ching hexagram 56. But in our DNA, it's the code. The shadow is distraction, right? And it's and so what you see in our young people is you see this massive wave passing through the world of distractions in so many different ways, and they're all the ways in which the shadow consciousness is distracting us from our essence. You know, and our essence is just really simple and clear, and we have inside us wisdom, unlimited stores of wisdom and love. But all the distraction is just creating anxiety but through our senses, and so we've lost our interiority. You know, we've lost that deep capacity to slow down and contemplate. You know, and contemplation it's like meditation, but it's a little bit more. I teach contemplation. It's more playful than meditation. It's a little bit more. It's a bit naughtier in some way as well, because you can kind of you can contemplate anything, and it includes all kinds of other techniques. It's the ageless interior way of looking within, and you can look within with your eyes closed. You can look within running or swimming or doing Tai Chi, or there's lots of ways of putting contemplation into action. It's not just about thinking, right? Although it might begin with thinking about deep things or about yourself. You know, it might begin with that, might begin with a dialogue. Is it like we're having here, deep dialogues? What we're doing is we are contemplating together. And people listening are also hopefully being triggered into their own contemplations that might go on after this dialogue and the other dialogues that you're having and that I'm having.
So when I'd love to take it back to the young people of the world, because it concerns us all, because after all, those of us older generation are looking at our younger generation. Sweeping generalization, we're seeing that some of the most educated or some of the most privileged are actually being distracted from their essence in the way that we have been distracted from our essence by the lure of capitalism.
Exactly.
Which has overreached the ego, as we know, so that we know many of the leaders of our land are actually, of our lands, I should say, are actually practicing atheists. They don't believe in the divine. And we know that the divine as a constitution, as a definition, is right at the very heart of what we understand to be Western civilization, because it was determined as thus. And we know that the celebration of the sanctity of the human being was right at the very core of their thinking, and that has been distorted, which means that the interiority of our dear ones, our young ones, is malaised. So what can, from a very practical point of view, using the gene keys, what can we use as a projected thought into a healing of that distracted consciousness?
Yeah, I think, understanding, it's a shadow, right? So a shadow needs to be understood and accepted and embraced, not kind of fought, and so the more deeply we become aware of how distracted we are by the many things of the world, the more uncomfortable we become. And then what that can do is that can drive us inside into a more contemplative conversation or dialogue with ourselves, with existence. And then we begin to look inside, and it might be that you find a meditation teacher or something, or a yoga person or something, and you listen to them, and the way they speak, it's not what they say so much as the way they speak kind of triggers something inside you that goes, I want that. What that person's got in their eyes, in their voice, I want that. How do I find that? And they'll say, close your eyes and go within in some way. and they'll help you go within and open up the interior world. And what happens in there is you find the gift that's in the shadow of distraction. The gift is enrichment, and there's endless riches to be found within. So distraction actually.
Just pause for a moment. So if we take a case study of a young person who is educated either at Columbia University or Harvard or at Princeton, these seats of such seemingly terminal unrest as a result of an indoctrination that has seeped into those universities over the last 20 years. I spent a lot of time as an ambassador for Shakespeare's Globe going into the US universities and masterclassing, and I began to saw the seeping consciousness 20 years ago, which of course in a very broad brushstroke is being referred to as being a distorted, or in your word, distracted Marxist philosophy. But at the same time, it comes into the mind and into the hearts of these young people when they're looking into a world and they see a world that they can't trust. So how would we speak to somebody who actually is so angry because all of the role models that they see before them are untrustworthy? How do we bring them back to the belief of understanding, firstly, how to explore the shadow lands, and then to move through the distraction into the inspiration?
Well, that's the journey that we have to invite all those people to take. We have to invite them.
But if they're angry, how do we actually, as you were saying, we don't confront. I've coined a word which is in front.
Yeah.
So
we may empathize, and we can begin by empathizing with that anger, because we feel it too, right? And so that's a great place to begin. You just kind of empathize with them so that they feel like you are on their wavelength. because, you know, it's like, because that we've loaded our education from the left brain only. You know, we have to sort of show these people that it's like they've gone to the gym for like 20 years and they've only worked out the left side of their body. All right. And the whole right side of their body is just like a wimpy little thing. And there's this massive, strong left side. And so they're hobbling about in the world. And so we've got to show them, okay, I can show you another whole way of arriving at truth. And it doesn't have to be strategic and logical and linear. It's a completely different route. And it's been used for millennia. I mean, the word I use is contemplation, because it's a friendly word. And it opens up to the potential of someone finding a route towards their own epiphany that they might, you know, their own revelation. Because revelation is another very bona fide way to arrive at truth. And actually it's much quicker than logic, because logic goes up, 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 builds up the pyramid, 1 + 1 = 2, da, 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 and it's very methodical and you get there eventually. But revelation, it's sort of, it opens from above rather than climbing up. It opens from above and it just tumbles down and in. And when I was in America recently, I had some really interesting conversations with a lot of interesting people, many of them very intellectual, and a lot of business people. And I was curious, as like, how are business people kind of at the front edge of things? What are they like? What are these very, very successful business people like in America? And one of the things that came out was that in many places now, because there's a whole big movement in the US of psychedelics. It's a massive opening, and so lots of it's not unusual now to find in a team of business people in a typical business, maybe one person in there has done ayahuasca or something, right? And that one person is then carrying this kind of thread that is like they've had an epiphany. Something powerful has shaken them, and they've seen that there's another world, a right brain world, you know, that's mythic, that's mysterious, that is got no real relation to the logical world in which we live. It's an inner world. It's not the outer world. Achievement on the inner world is completely different. It's not like it is. So everything that we've been distracted, that's taken us out on this other route, suddenly you're aware there's this other whole massive world within, and it's full of riches and wealth and at a different level. And so I was very heartened to kind of see this movement and see how it's kind of shaking people awake in lots of different ways.
It's absolutely wonderful. And, you know, I work in the States as well. So in the corporate world, so I've met journeys with very extraordinary people who suddenly start talking about ayahuasca journeys and going and
well, it's a way in, isn't it?
in the Amazon, and you know, very, very rich substances, and they look quite conventional people. So it's always fascinating to see that level of liberation. But from your perspective, with this level of inquiry, with this level of experiential, where they're moving into a transcendental consciousness, where we lose control from the egoic point of view, what do you feel? Were you able to observe in the people that you were meeting? What did you feel were the panaceas of the present conflicts that we see, for example, in the corporatocracy of the world, and particularly the United States, because it's such a major leader?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, some of the panaceas are taking place in the health culture, you know, because there's a massive interest now in self-empowered health, and health and foods that really feed our gut and our, you know, our deep kind of biome and things like that, you know, because when you change your diet, you change your psyche. And so you open up, you know, especially in your biome and in your gut. It's like if you start changing the nature of, you know, that area of your body, it changes the way you think, because those two parts of your body are completely connected. So the health culture is one place where I think that panacea is happening. And the wealthier you are, the more interested you will become in those things, because you've got everything else. So you want to feel good. and you want to look good, and you want to live longer, so that you can enjoy the fruits of all the things you've done, unless you're an addict, a work addict, a workaholic, which is another story, and there are plenty of them. So I think that that's an area that's opening up. And I think lots of other, I mentioned the psychedelic culture, and I think, the whole, I just think it's traveling faster now than it was 10 years ago, this awakening impulse. And it's because it's reached into more people and more, and although there's a lot of rubbish out there, as you well know, there's a lot of sort of charlatanism, and there's a lot of instant experts in all kinds of things.
Well, there's a lot of distraction, shall we say? As you were saying, if we lose our interiority, we become distracted, and then we make uncertain choices, inappropriate choices. So can we be prophetic? Based on the observations that you've made, and look into what you feel through the wealth and the experience of allowing the gene keys to pour through you, and then over the last 10 years, 12 years of teaching the gene keys, what do you feel prophetically will be the journey and process that will lead the individuals that we're referring to, particularly within corporatocracy? Where will it lead them to a greater understanding of liberation?
Well, I like to think of it as across the board, actually, because when the prophecy that came out of measuring, through the gene keys and human design, as I mentioned, when you look at the codes, the gene keys that are changing, and the ones they're changing from, you can see in the key.
Changing, what do you mean?
Well, that because of this axis of the precession of the equinox that shifts in 2027 to a whole new epoch, in a way, it's like there's a whole new set of themes that will take us through the next 450 years, right?
So there are new gene theories coming forth.
Well, new archetypal energies that will be driving civilization from inside us, right? So so it's like,
can you give us a tangible witness of what you mean by a new archetypal energy?
Well, I call it the new human, or the future human. So when I talk about the great change, I also talk about the future human, that there's a new human coming into the world, a new vehicle, a new biovehicle that is mutating from inside the old one, this one, right? This hybrid one that we're in now. And so when you consider that, like it's happened before in a history of our species, that that biology has reached a genetic fork, and then a new species has emerged from the old species. We've seen that. And in the prophecy of the gene keys, that's what it's talking about. And so its symbol that I use a lot is the dragonfly. The dragonfly that lives underwater, and this, for 2 or 3 years as an underwater being, an underwater predator, and then one day finds its way up a stalk of grass or a reed, and then as it kind of reaches the sunlight, and it's never done that before, it's never left the water, so it suddenly comes out to the sunlight, and the sun starts to beat down on it and starts to dry it out and force its wings to open and its thorax to literally split open the old body, and then this incredible creature of the air that's multicolored and iridescent and as a miracle of design suddenly flies off. And that happens within the space of, so it's lived for 3 years, and then it happens within the space of 3 hours. And so it goes from being this to being in another dimension. And that is a very good symbol, I think, for where we as a species are heading. Something's going to happen very, very quickly that we're not expecting, but some of us are anticipating it, but very few of us have a sense of what it actually, how different we're going to be in 400 years, or in the process.
Existence.
Sorry?
Those of us that have vision, those of us that are awakened to the fact that we're living a path of truth, and that we're fascinated about the interactive energies between human and divine, then we have a sense of, those of us that have lived a few years, because I believe living a few years allows one to explore one's capacity, how, what is the leveling mechanism of one's power, and does one live that power as truthfully and as lovingly as one can? Do you need to switch anything off there?
No,
Suddenly,
good.
Ping. So, because much of the teaching that I'm receiving from non-corporeal beings, meaning the angels of Atlantis that have been with me for now nearly 40 years, are teaching me about the fact that Homo sapien is becoming Homo noeticus, that we are evolving genetically into a much higher level of vibration, with the preparation of stepping into fourth dimensionality as a preparation for fifth dimensionality, which of course is no time and weightless, which is fascinating. So that we move into eventually we move into a position of being the shining ones, which of course we know appears throughout our history, our genetic history and our civilizational history over the years. Those of us who have the ability or the interest in pouring into that level of mysticism, the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, that we become shining ones or we become Homo luminous. Is that what you're really referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. I call it Homo Sanctus, and it's because and the gene keys. I've got my book here, right? It shows the dragonfly on the front, right? And it's the Gene Keys book, which is the sort of code book that started the whole Gene Keys movement in a way, describes every single one of those keys and its eventual destiny as that kind of shining the siddhi, right? So when you read all the siddhis and you look at them, you're actually reading about the future consciousness of the new human. But as I understand it, it requires a biological mutation in order for a new kind of vehicle to emerge. So
what is that?
Yeah. What does that look like?
What is that biological mutation?
I think it's probably at some level fairly invisible. I mean, I think a geneticist might find markers and things and beginning to already like one of the things that some geneticists are looking at in humans is triple helix DNA or quadruple. I was talking to Zach Bush about this recently, and what they've discovered is that those, instead of it being a double helix, they found in some mutations in people triple helix, and actually it causes cancer often. But actually, what some geneticists are trying to do is take that those triple helix codes and insert them before a cancer cell, so that it stops the cancer cell, right? So it's in a way using the shadow against the shadow, or I've described that in a simple way. But it's interesting because if you think about the body, it has the capacity to create these mutations, and our intelligence knows where to place them, right? So if we were to kind of, be about to contract a cancer or some kind of illness that's going to then cause debilitation, the intelligence of our higher being knows where to insert those triple helix mutations in order to stop that debilitating disease from occurring. So essentially what I'm talking about is that could massively expand our health, our age span, and change, the nature of our biology and therefore the nature of our consciousness. So it's a bit wild, but that's the nature of like moving from underwater predator to creature of the air, iridescent dragon of the air. It's like it's so different.
We're underwater.
Barely imagine it. Well, we're sort of maybe us and what people watching this, we're crawling up the stalk. We're thinking we're halfway up there and we're going, what the hell am I doing?
The way that I believe in the human species, I feel that maybe some of us are, but there is a very large intelligentsia that is growing, as you well know, globally, that is full of the richness of mind, body, spirit, and the new capital of what that really means. So we're really examining the way that we feel, understanding that if we are emotionally intelligent, that is the linguistic that brings together both the biochemical and the use of the intellect in terms of futuristic cosmology. And so, if we suddenly realize that the triple helix DNA, or indeed if we move into a 4 helix DNA or
other
5,
versions,
that actually we do not need to ingest any form of corrupt organism in our cells that begins to battle against it, because we know that cancer is based on rogue cell epigenetically trying to fight against good cells, great cells, healthy cells.
Yeah.
So, wow, the prophecy. So personally, in the fulfillment of the prophecy, of course, I'm going to ask one of those indubitable questions, which is, how long is this going to take?
Everyone always asks that.
Can we have a date, please? No, I'm being very just to create humor.
No.
In relation to your own life, as you look forward over the next 30, 40 years of your chronology, possibly more, because we know that many of our epigeneticists are saying that we actually have the capability of us on a cellular level for living for 300 years. It's just that the mental perception of aging is something that defeats us, my brother is a year older than I. We're both in our early 70s, and I'm convincing him that he's not elderly. We had a conversation the other day, and he said, I think I'm very elderly. And I said, no, don't use that word.
No.
Let's literally exhume what that conditioning is all about.
Yes, so that you're ripening is what you should say.
Exactly. In fact, I said something equivalent. Yeah. So where, in terms of the prophecy and how all of this rich information feeds you, where will you be in 30 years' time in terms of the mutational process of your own humanness?
Well, I'm also, I'm a cosmic magician like you, but I'm also a bit of a realist, and my other kind of life is lived on the material plane and in business.
Yeah, we've started to Earth.
Right. So let's come plummeting down and be realistic as well, because like a couple of things. So it takes time for these mutations to kind of work their way into a species, and so I would expect them to start appearing from 2027 around the world in babies that are born, but also that then kind of carries on over the next 400 years, like spreading, right, and growing with it. It's like a new human growing within the kind of existing falling apart human, right? And I think that we're probably going to see that pattern on the outside as well in our civilization. So we're going to see the collapse of like old structures and patterns and paradigms that could be very frightening for many people, because everything that we've sort of created our life on is everything right now, the Amazon that comes to your door or whatever, it's like all things that we take for granted, at a certain point are not going to be there in a certain point in the next probably 100 years, let's say,
or within the next 5 years, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm being like very broad. It could well be much sooner, but it's coming for sure. And I think the climate crisis also is going to very much contribute to that. I think it needs to contribute to that. I mean, that sounds awful, but I think that Gaia is also doing this, even though we're her instrument at some level. The young kind of adolescent child is like running around, running amok, and Gaia's, as the great mother, is just going, well, I'm going to let him run or her run amok for a bit, and we'll see what happens. Right? And one of the things that will happen is the potential mutation, is change, because crisis always is one of the markers for change, for intense change. And so it doesn't have to be, but it is a kind of universal law, it seems, that some form of like radical shift is required at times for one to move from this plane to this plane, from the underwater.
We're dense beings, aren't we? We're very dense beings,
we are.
On all levels of being. And so, as we see, many of us have awoken over the last 30 or 40 years in this great wave of ecstasy in relation to, I don't mean taking psychotropics or psychedelics,
Yeah. Yeah.
but in terms of what we've actually seen as being our potential, that we know that many of us have actually awoken not through inspiration, but through desperation, because there is so much within our unconscious that was in shadowlands that we weren't even aware of. And so we're shaken by the Great Mother and taken into darkness, because all things grow in darkness, whether it be the human fetus or putting a small seed into the earth, everything grows in the darkness. And as a result of going into the darkness, the long dark night of the soul, as painful as it is, having gone through a number myself, that we sprout forth, we open our wings. See, there's something mutationally, I'd love to create another window within the perspective, if I may, which is, well, I'm going to anyway. But if we can see that we're very dense in our carbon bodies, and the future is allowing us to move into a crystalline body where the light of our being is going to electrify all of the neural pathways, all of our meridian lines into our chakras, into the very substance of the subatomic level of our beings. So we become the shining ones. Therefore, we actually begin to develop those powers that we read about in mystery, or we read about, or we watch on our screens when we watch Marvel movies and we see the superheroes that are able to do extraordinary things. I'm working with 4 young people at the moment who are twin-souled people. They're all in the United States, America, but they began by being in a pretty profound confusion about their gender. And then as they awakened through the work that we've been doing over the last 7 years, that they're now moving into this frank acceptance of the fact that they are twin-spirited, that they are actually a hybrid, where they feel themselves exploring the nature of what it is to live in their feminine and in their masculine. And this is to do with their gender identity. It's not to do with their sexuality. Although a number of them are having been celibate for many years, a number of them beginning to define what it is to operate as a polyamorous, or indeed as a biamorous individual. So that's quite fascinating. I see that also as being one of the hybrids that we're seeing, that is very palpably real before us on the world stage.
Very much.
Very disturbing for parents, of course, particularly when the parent is caught within the conventional model of, but it has to be this way, rather
Very
than,
much.
well, what are you experiencing? So how do you feel about the transformation of carbon into crystalline?
Well, I think it's inevitable. I don't know, I wouldn't hazard a guess about the timing of that. I don't know, because I see it as like the next yuga, the next epoch. But I don't, that may come quicker than anyone realizes as well. I mean, and what is time? When we're out of time, time is not time as we know it. It just moves instantly. So 1,000 years is nothing.
It's pointless talking about time, isn't it? But what's interesting, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, is that we can see that there are archetypal fusions of energy that lead us, that are, I don't actually have a word in this moment, that actually move beyond the substance of what it is to be carbon, and therefore it moves beyond what it means to be a molecular creature. When we move into the pure light of crystalline, then we don't need time and we don't need density to explore the level of shadow consciousness or the divisions that have been created. That wonderful notion of the fact that the divine decided through oneness to separate into two for the joy of becoming one again. And it seems that we're on that upward curve. So time ceases to be. How do you see our peoples, in your own visions, in your own desire, in your own wonder for the future? How do you see our peoples living?
Yeah, I see us living much more simply. I see, in a way, a kind of integration of the indigenous way of life with a future way of life that hasn't yet come in, because there's the grounding of the indigenous view, which is this magical view, this mythic view of reality. But then there's also this very futuristic, almost angelic, what you call crystalline, consciousness that can come and sit and live within that. So I see that, and I also see it as a collectivity. It's not so much in an only tribal way, in the old-fashioned tribal way, which I think is beautiful, but more in a networked genius of consciousness way, so that we become a networked consciousness where our individuality is actually enhanced rather than lost by that network genius. And that's a bit of a mystery. It's like the power of our kind of immortal, eternal soul. Suddenly, more of it can incarnate inside this vehicle, a lot more of it, and there's more space for it, and the vehicle houses it much more elegantly, and so I imagine our faces will change, and the shape of the structure of our beings will over time change as well, and I imagine we'll become more beautiful as we would see ourselves as more beautiful, and more noble, and we see that today in certain people. We'll see, like, we see nobility, and we're like, or dignity, and we're in the way someone walks or moves, and I think we're going to become, as a collective, like that, much more majestic, because that's actually one of the gene keys of the new epoch is majesty. That's the city of majesty, and it's about majesty in movement. So I see the future kind of human, or the sort of, what I guess some people call it the collective Buddha or whatever it is, not as a sitting. It's not sitting down. It's as an icon. It's not the sitting Buddha. It's a standing human. It's standing with its spine powerful and erect, and like that's the human. It's like, and I think you're right. I think there's all kinds of relational fields that that we've not discovered between the layers of our gender and the gender within the gender and the binaries and all of those kind of things. I think there's a lot of group chemistry that kind of has a lot of power in it, as so what am I thinking, like sacred geometries within certain chemistries, like 4 people, 5 people, 12 people, 18 people. Each group has a sacred geometry to it, and the specific souls that show up and work in that chemistry or live in that chemistry together, whether it's 2 or 25, there's something very magical that can come into that group in the future. And as a whole, I think we're kind of, this is the fractals, like the whole of humanity is also one group and one crystalline grid, but we also have these sub vehicles that we're going to play in, and we're going to move around in, and we're going to explore. And I would say finally that the thing we're going to explore is bliss, is the fields of bliss, because we're shifting from suffering, right? And that's the thing when I say about the dragonfly and it's underwater and we can't imagine the one up there. Like, it's because we're so immersed in suffering that we don't know anything else. We don't know what bliss is. We might have had a moment, but this dimension is bliss, and bliss is left suffering behind. And you might think bliss is one thing, but it's not. It's as rich and infinite as suffering is. And we've learned from suffering, we've almost done with that phase. But bliss is like a whole other opening. It has corridors and dimensions and geometries and possibilities and a whole dharma, and it's like thousands and thousands of years to explore bliss as a species. Thousands, hundreds of thousands even. In our
really describing the ecstasy of the angelic communion.
I know it's kind of wild, but
no, it's not wild in the slightest. That trivializes what you're talking about. It's something that I utterly believe in, and I've seen the beginning of transcendence of this, for example, in very extreme situations. Being asked by the UN if I would go into Gaza to run a workshop with aid workers, with UN and Red Cross workers, and seeing the transcendence that they move through a process of 3 hours, how an empathic magic was created between us, even though they were very splintered to begin with, and going through a tremendous amount of PTSD and terminal problems to do
Mm.
with mental fatigue, and how we came together and this form of magic was created where the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, came in, and they were, you know, these weren't people that were necessarily awakened to the mystical celebration of what life can be about. You know, they're warriors, but we moved into this transcendent, and as a result, they all experienced bliss, and that healed their terminal constipation.
It is bliss
So,
is a
you know,
very.
so I know, talking on the subject of bliss, our time, unfortunately, is coming to a position of completion. But there is this wonderful project, which is a perfect segue for the success project that you're revealing towards the end of this year, somewhere around December the 9th, when this wonderful deep dialogue is going to be broadcast. Can you tell us about success, please?
Yeah, well, it's called the Star Pearl. It's a new kind of iteration of the Gene Keys teachings. It's been in development for several years, many years actually, and we've been trialing it, and we're sort of ready to launch it as a kind of social experiment in 2025. So if anyone's interested in refining and redefining what success really means for you in your life, that's what it's going to be about. And it uses the Gene Keys as a technology, but it also uses it starts with an assessment, a very kind of nuanced, powerful assessment that you do of your whole life. And it should take you no more than 20 minutes, but it's very kind of nuanced. And then what that does is it shows you immediately an immediate strength and immediate kind of weakness. I don't even want to call it a weakness, but it's actually where the gift lies. And then you go on a program and a process using the Gene Keys that kind of shows you certain shadow patterns that you want to focus all your energy onto and contemplate them and bring them alive and heal them and transform them and find the gifts hidden in them. And what you're doing is over a period of months, and it does take months because that's how, we're talking about the whole of someone's life, to bring your life to a flowering. That is not something you can do overnight. There's a process. So we think that 9 months is like a good starting base for what can we do in 9 months? And we're also, because we've developed algorithms and apps that are kind of tracking all this, we can also do it as a community. So we can watch the entire community shifting through its, because there's a way of grading and measuring your own life patterns and the places where you're happy and the places where you're not so happy.
Wow.
And so it's like a tuning fork. It's about harmony, and the language we use is harmonic and musical. But you're going to do it over a period of time through a contemplative journey of creating small actions probably in your life that might have big effects, but also really turning your focus inwards to look at, well, what is success for me? Because it becomes entirely different for the person sitting next to me.
So for you, for Richard, what is success? What's your definition of success?
Well, it's more nuanced than just a single word, but one of the things,
me, I want to synthesize all of those nuances.
I will do my best. For me, I would say that my success is going to be about seeing and experiencing the success of others, and especially a large group of people. And that's what I get a lot out of Gene Keys, like the work I do. I'm I don't know, I'm a bit of a hermit in a way, and I live just at home, and I'm a writer, and I kind of live a simple life with my family. But then every now and again, I come outdoors and I meet people and I do an event, and I'm like, oh my goodness, people coming up to me and saying, your work's changed my life, it saved my marriage, it did, and in their hundreds or thousands, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to kind of. It's like, so it's more of that for me. Yeah, it's knowing that I've helped people. But
that's not a feeling. That's a knowing, but it's not a feeling. How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel?
Oh, it makes me feel wonderful, really wonderful. It makes me feel fulfilled, like I've fulfilled my life's purpose, and that's in a way what this program is all about, the Star Pearl. So if you check out Gene Keys, it'll be on the front of the website, because we're going to be like rolling it out throughout the year of 2025, and we want as many people to join the experiment with us as possible.
And so to find the app, to find the brilliant project and the work, we need to go to genekeys.com. Am I right in saying? I know that Ryan has it, so I'll put it up on the screen, and certainly look at the link, you know, the links,
and you'll find it on the homepage there. It's Star Pearl. It's the thing that we're kind of really talking about this year. Yeah.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, we're going to have to come to a point of completion. But before we do go, what is the question that hasn't been asked in our conversation, in our deep dialogue? Deep dialogue.
Ooh, that's such a good question in itself, isn't it? The unasked question. I guess like an unasked question might be something for me like, what's your life like? What's your personal life like?
Yeah, that's what I meant by how does it feel?
Yeah.
So that we, you know, because we know that we humans come together when we're cherishing the beauty of another's existence. If we move away from our own narcissism. Beautiful.
Exactly. Just simple things.
A very extraordinary conversation. So I want to thank you very deeply thank you personally, but also on behalf of all the wonderful people that I know will be tuning in. And, you know, there is the matter of a deep dialogue, which is to move through conversation, but also to challenge and to find ways of being able to dig deeper into the vibrational frequency of really what we're talking about, which is about excavating the whole of our interior from a cellular, from an emotional, from an intellectual, and from a shadow complex point of view, so that we can live all of it as a myriad prism of such infinitesimal joy. Richard,
You're
thank you
such
so
a great
much.
poet, Stewart.
It's all given to me by the angels. It's our unified, you and I, our unified love of, particularly of this language, but of others, you know, obviously other languages. We're going right into the substance of the folkloric and going deep into the primal seams that language has poured out of, and how it's crystalline in the great songs and the great poetry, because it's all to do with the way that we feel, and hopefully we're feeling jubilant and full of wonder and full of awe.
Exactly.
Bless you. Thank you so much for coming and engaging in this. And ladies and gentlemen, please do go to deepdialoguepodcasts.com, and you'll see there are many, many deep dialogues with all sorts of extraordinary people. I mean, Richard, you're part of a season of gentlemen, you know, like Freddie Silver and William Henry, and Zach Bush was on earlier. I mean, so many extraordinary people. There we are, Deep Dialogues podcast, and we'll make sure that, of course, Gene Keys is within the links in the description. So thank you so much, everybody. Namaste, namaste.
Thanks,
Richard, please.